All right, so here we are. Where I'm joined again by Hannah Miraglia. She's right over here, and she's going to be joining us here in a second. I want to talk about one of the most common tropes that we find in literature. We've seen it over and over again, and that is the trope of the femme fatale. And the femme fatale, which literally just means the dangerous female. Which is a recurring trope, especially when you consider the fact that the literature is written by men. It's probably the single most dominant trope in literature that is from men, and some of it is just kind of just delightful in a way. Because, like for example, I love Jessica Rabbit. If anyone remembers Who Framed Roger Rabbit, where she's kind of like the sexy, dangerous female. And the funny part about that is she's not that at all. Um, but the femme fatale is this character who is often sexy and alluring, but ultimately dangerous. And if you get too close, it will be your demise. Good examples of this might even begin with Adam and Eve. We have Eve, who is depicted not as the text itself depicts, which is where you have Eve and Adam are actually at the tree together, because the text is very clear when it says, and Eve takes the fruit and gives it to her husband who is with her. We've created this more the story of Eve, the femme fatale, the dangerous woman who kind of ultimately becomes Adam's demise. Uh, Even in some of our great literatures, we have the various goddesses of destruction. Goddesses of destructive gods are almost always viewed as women. Like, actually, this right here is a siren. Sometimes we talk about sirens as mermaids, but actually, more often than not, sirens are supposed to be a woman, part bird. And of course, they lure you with their beautiful song, and then they kill you. Uh, so he's here. This is another depiction of in the Odyssey. Remember, we had the sirens, and I just think it's creepy, to be honest, because it's just like these bird bodies with women's heads. I prefer this. This looks a little more realistic and maybe a little more alluring than that. Although I'm a fan of mermaids and sea creatures, so I like this a little bit better. Um, but maybe that's because I'm a fan of sea lore and such. We also see a femme fatale hinted at in the story of Oedipus, where you have a sphinx, and a sphinx is also generally female, and it's a woman slash lion slash eagle, and tends to be a very wise and intelligent creature that will trick you with a riddle, and if you fail the riddle, then you die. Uh, and of course, we often depict them as sexy. We love to have our villains to be sexy, especially in superhero and video game lore. If you ever go to a fan con, you'll see that depicted quite well. So you have these dangerous women. They're not always evil, because even the good ones, they're often sexy, but they're always dangerous. And before I go much further, I want to talk a little bit. I want to bring Hannah in on this and talk about this, because it's a fascinating aspect of literature. It's something that we see in ancient literature, and we also see it in contemporary literature with this idea of the femme fatale, the dangerous female. Um, and I don't know, to just put Hannah on the spot here, maybe what are some of your thoughts, first of all, on the idea of the femme fatale?
Um, well, I guess I have a question for you.
Okay, I love questions.
Should I focus on why I think they're in literature, or should I just give my
either way,
on...
whichever comes out. Just kidding.
Okay, all right. I think femme fatales can be interesting, and you see them in almost every story and piece of media.
It does seem like almost everyone.
Yeah, has one woman in there who is depicted as attractive, sexy, but also dangerous, and is ultimately going to lead to destruction. But I think that femme fatales may exist in literature. I think they embody kind of wanting something that you can't have or something that's bad for you. And I don't think that's just like a struggle of men or anything. But I do think that that's kind of where the femme fatale may come from, or what it embodies.
I think one of the things that's interesting, if you look at romantic comedies, they'll often have, even in that, even though the protagonist is a woman, it's so interesting how very often the antagonist is this dangerous but kind of sexy woman who's getting in the way and is also trying to get the guy, but she's going to be ultimately destructive. So I've often wondered if it doesn't also represent a little bit of men's fear.
That's the other thought I had, that it could be.
Because I think we don't talk about it much, but there's a fear that men have of women. And I'm not just talking about the kind of the Samson Delilah angle, and of course Delilah is another good example of the femme fatale, that somehow if you get too close that you'll get hurt. But there is a sense that many men have, especially as you're growing up, that women are dangerous and terrifying. And I don't know, maybe they are. I haven't lived in the dorm. Maybe they are.
I mean, I don't think they are, but or I get terrifying or dangerous, or maybe just out for their own gain ultimately.
Are you offended by this image, by the way, as a woman?
By the femme fatale? Sometimes. I guess it depends on the character. I think sometimes when she's not a complex character, it just kind of looks like she's just there to be sexy or to make a statement about women only wanting power or money or whatever.
Right.
But no, I mean, not all of them. And I think if a character's done right, they can be interesting.
Right. Now, one of the interesting things about the popularity of the comic books is the comic books, of course, originated as a kind of pulp fiction for boys, not men even, just boys, like 12-year-old boys, which is the reason why the women are often depicted rather sexy. In the same way that video games, their target audience with video games, even some of the ones that are MA, their target audience is actually 12-year-old boys. And so it's not shocking when you realize who they're actually trying to target and lure in. But the popularity of such things have expanded to be all ages, and men and women. I'm curious to know, because I know that you're a fan of a lot of superheroes and things like that. I would love to know, what are your thoughts on the fact, not to put you on the spot here, but the fact that when you watch, say, a Marvel film, the women are all sexy, I mean, Superman doesn't have to be in a bathing suit like Wonder Woman.
Right. I think it's a bit of a double standard, I'll be honest. I think, though, that especially recently we're seeing a trend toward costume designers and writers and even artists realizing that, and realizing that actually these are characters that we can really make complex and deep, and it's not just about showing off her body. You see that with Captain Marvel. She's dressed from neck to feet, and her costume is practical, and she can fight in it. And you see a lot of the femme fatale in Black Widow, and she still, even like in Endgame, no spoilers, but she still has kind of her catsuit outfit. But I think that they fleshed her out as a character a lot, and we see, well, she's not just a femme fatale. She's more than that. Does that answer your?
That does, absolutely. And I think people are interested in their story. I understand they're actually in the making right now of a Black Widow origin story, which it's about time, because I think that hers it would be an interesting story. Um, and one of the reverse of this, though, now because we're dealing with ancient literature, so we end up dealing with literature that's by men, often for men. Uh, but very frequently, what we think of as the converse of this, that we see very frequently in novels by women, because of course the novel is itself a kind of feminine form, originally originated in large part by women, and in that we see something very different, which we sometimes today rather pejoratively refer to as the Beauty and the Beast syndrome. So whereas with men and stories largely by men, or at least trying to prey on the fears of men, where you have the dangerous female who's sexy and alluring, but she'll destroy you. In a lot of stories where especially their target is women, you'll have the man who is a bad boy, if you will. He's the maybe a little terrifying, someone who can be fixed, and of course is often fixed, despite the fact that in real life that's a nice recipe for disaster. When you think you can fix a guy and it turns out he's not. I'm curious. I'd like to hear your take on the idea of the Beauty and the Beast syndrome. How common is it, and how much of an impact do you think that this has on what women, of course, like to consume entertainment-wise, but also perhaps how women view the world? So in the same way, I would argue one of the dangers of the femme fatale is it contributes to men's fear of women, which can actually create very unhealthy things. And to the most extreme, it can actually create violence towards women. But the reverse can also be damaging, and that is the Beauty and the Beast effect. Again, to put you on the spot here, but what are your thoughts on that?
So first, I think that one of the reasons that the bad boy trope or character is so appealing to women is often that even though he's tough on the surface, he is bad, but his heart is ultimately
right. There's
pure
something good in there,
and in a good place. So I think that's a lot of the appeal of a bad boy. But I also think it stems from my reasoning for the femme fatale is that I think the bad boy also embodies wanting something that's bad for you. And then I guess going that step further too, and not only wanting something that's bad for you, but wanting to change what's bad for you into something good and living happily ever after.
Which I've heard that story in a lot of different ways in novels and film, but I have to say I've seen that story played out in the real world where it actually turns out quite tragic.
Yes.
Where the beast, if you will, remains a beast. Often the beast doesn't have any castle or anything like that. Rather, it can be quite destructive.
Right.
In the same way that I think both tropes appeal to us because they because we see a kind of I don't want to say a truth, but we do see, but it's not completely unrealistic that you might run into something like that, but it's a very narrow truth, we'll say that, that is more dangerous perhaps than it is helpful. The and I don't know, I'm not a woman, but is there something that often I remember, since I will admit that my graduate degree is in women's studies, so we talked about this quite a bit, but the lure of fixing the other character is quite powerful.
Right.
Um,
And I do think a lot of women have that desire to fix someone that they love,
mhm,
so that they'll be better. And
mhm. I I've often wondered, because one of the complaints that you'll hear, first of all, um, from men who are not bad boys, is the complaint that, hey, I'm not one of those. I'm just a normal guy doing my, trying my hardest, and uh, and so I seem less appealing. And converse, I would imagine, is women who are just doing the right thing don't come across as that dangerous female, just doing the right thing, and both feel, like, I don't, am I doing
right, if you're not those things, are you not attractive?
right? Or have you lost your appeal?
Right.
And I would love to hear, as a matter of fact, I would love to hear some comments from people
That'd be really interesting.
on that. Well, I appreciate that, because what I want is for you to find these two tropes throughout the literature. We've seen it actually already. We've seen it in Gilgamesh. We've seen it in the Odyssey. We've seen it in Oedipus. We're going to see it again over and over again, and when we look at Ovid's Metamorphoses. But we also will begin to see later, especially as we get into some things that are more modern, because by modern I mean Shakespeare. But as you begin to get into film and things like that that are very contemporary today, these two tropes are very constant, and I want you to be aware of them. That they are useful in some ways from a storyteller's perspective, from a writer's perspective. These are actually quite useful tropes. Since people recognize them, it's kind of lazy writing, because they don't have to work too hard, that you immediately recognize, oh, there's the femme fatale, or oh, there's the beast. And I've already got feelings of how that should play out. But notice that it's also dangerous in the real world, that it's not a truth that plays out always well in the real world. So anyway, so some comments I'd love to have you examine. Thank you to Hannah for putting in her input, and keep doing the good work, everybody.